My name is Antonio Reynoso, and I'm the president of the greatest borough in the city of New York, which is Brooklyn. And we're very happy to be here today because we want to make sure that we're bringing attention to a very important issue that's going to address a lot of issues that we have in this city. But I want to start off by thanking Councilmember Lincoln Ressler, my good friend, for leading the charge behind today's event, and to all of those that are standing behind me, including our Assemblymember Joanne Simon. Lincoln, can you stand up here, please?
I was on the steps.
This is, Lincoln called me and said to make this happen, so I just want to be clear, it was initiated by the council members, so he should get all the love.
It's not how it works.
Yeah, it is. I feel especially lucky that you all came here to my home at Borough Hall, because today we're gathered not only in the best borough of this city, but in the best city in the world. And we're gathered to rally support for a way to make it even better. Congestion pricing has been a long time coming, nearly 15 years. And it's the plan that's still around for good reasons. If we do it together and we do it right, congestion pricing is set to be a win-win-win for our economy, our environment, and our people. It will boost our public transportation, clean up our air, and make our streets safer. And we need it now. Soaring rates of car ownership and the dire fiscal needs of the MTA require urgency. We cannot let speed get in the way of doing this right. So what we want to do is do it the right way. And we want to make sure that we pay attention to the many communities that need the relief and support that they would be receiving through congestion pricing. And I want to recognize the South Bronx. The South Bronx is an area in which I cared about deeply in my time as a city council member, reducing truck traffic by more than 33% related to sanitation trucks and waste transfer stations in the South Bronx. That was a legislation that I want to be clear with that didn't pass easy. It didn't pass easy. We were able to cut the truck traffic in North Brooklyn by 50%. 50%. But in Southeast Queens and South Bronx, only 33%. And I want to make sure that the same people that could have gotten 50% for these communities are not the ones that are talking about the impacts that congestion pricing would have on the South Bronx. I want to be clear about that, because we care about the South Bronx. We care about environmental justice communities that need relief. But the idea here is not to push traffic anywhere. It's to reduce it. It's to be done with it. To move away from car ownership and move into public transportation, so we can start solving for the environmental justice issues that we have citywide. And we can do that. And we can be thoughtful. And we can be creative. And we still have time to make sure that we're tinkering and working along the edges to make sure that we get to where we want to get to. But again, we got to be very mindful, very, very mindful of the crisis that we are dealing with now when it comes to congestion and environmental pollution and car ownership in this city. Our population continues to increase, but our streets do not continue to grow. But car ownership at about 43 to 47% clip in the city of New York means that every time 100,000 residents come into New York, we're probably going to see 50,000 vehicles. We have to move away from that. We have to discourage that and encourage walking, cycling, and using our mass transit. And that's what we're here to say today. That in Brooklyn, we're standing strong for congestion pricing. That we're standing as a unit to make sure that it is something we see very soon and that we stop the delays. We stop the delays and we get to work. Thank you so much for everyone that's here behind me. I want to especially thank again Councilmember Lincoln Ressler for helping me put this together, and want to call him up. A friend of mine for a very long time, a very, very long time, since I've been about 22 years old. 22 years old. And I tell you, when we were sitting in a couple of these spaces, we never thought we would be here in front of Brooklyn Borough Hall talking about congestion pricing as a borough president and as a city council member. But even at that time, these type of ideas, these type of thoughts, being bold was what we wanted to do. Moving away from incrementalism and thinking that slow progress will bring us justice. It's about doing more. And that is what congestion pricing is being bold. And now I bring up the council member from this district, my council member in this, when I'm in this building, Council Member Lincoln Ressler.
Thank you. I truly believe there is no stronger champion for our mass transit system in elected office in New York City than our Borough President Antonio Reynoso. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. Really want to thank you, Antonio, for hosting us today and for galvanizing so many folks across Brooklyn to stand up and speak out in support of congestion pricing. You know, this is a joyous fight because congestion pricing is pivotal not just to the future of our economy, but to the future of our environment. There are two things that make New York City truly the best place on earth. First, our people. Second, our mass transit system. And due to the convoluted structure of the MTA, we have underfunded mass transit for generations. Congestion pricing represents a new, sustainable, and absolutely necessary funding stream to deliver the buses and the trains that we deserve. We need better maintenance in our system. We need a guarantee of a subway showing up in 6 minutes when you get to that platform. Let me tell you, in this district, we have more subway lines than any council district outside of Manhattan. We have over 24 subway stations, and just about every bus in Brooklyn leads to downtown Brooklyn. This is a hub of mass transit, but we see our transit system faltering. This is the $15 billion, congestion pricing represents the $15 billion in capital funding that we desperately need to secure the mass transit that we all desperately need. Now, it's not just about improving our trains and improving our buses. It's also about improving our air quality. We have to get out of our personal cars. We have to make sure transit is the number 2 source of emissions in New York City. After buildings, the number 2 source of emissions in our city are the cars and the trucks on our streets. We've got to decline it. We have no choice. The greatest threat facing New York City is climate change. This is a tangible, major, sweeping policy that will dramatically reduce the number of cars and trucks on the street in New York City. And I want you to know, just like Antonio, we are deeply committed to reducing car and truck traffic everywhere. So yes, this is going to have a major impact in improving the air quality here in downtown Brooklyn and across all of the areas like ours that serve as a gateway into the Central Business District. But we've got more work to do in the South Bronx and in other communities. This isn't about moving truck and car traffic around. This is about, as Antonio said, reducing it altogether. And we're in this fight. And I really want to thank all of the advocates who are standing here with us, because we didn't get here just yesterday. This has been a long and arduous battle, dating back to the Bloomberg years, where folks standing behind me have been trekking up to Albany time and again to secure buy-in, to build support across our borough, across this city, across this state for congestion pricing. And it's as a result of your hard work that we are on the precipice of this victory. And so tomorrow is the deadline for the comment period, and we are absolutely urging the Federal Highway Administration to expeditiously approve the MTA's tolling program so that we can get this done immediately. And the last group of folks I want to thank is I want to give a special shout out to each of the elected officials who've signed a letter with us today. We've got about 15 folks from across Brooklyn who represent our communities, who have signed a support for the MTA, for the FHA to move expeditiously forward with the approval for congestion pricing. In addition to our Borough President and our great local Assembly Member Joanne Simon, Assembly Member Bobby Carroll, Council Member Shahana Hanif, Assembly Member Marcela Mitaines, Council Member Rita Joseph, State Senator Julia Salazar, Council Member Sandy Nurse, Council Member Alexa Aviles, Assembly Member Emily Gallagher, Council Member Crystal Hudson, Council Member Jennifer Gutierrez, and State Senator Andrew Gennardes. We want to thank each of you for your leadership in support for congestion pricing. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a great friend and a true champion for congestion pricing and environmental justice, our Assembly Member Joanne Simon. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, Lincoln. So thank you. I'm going to challenge you a little on the 15 years, though.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. All right.
When we did the downtown Brooklyn traffic calming project in the late 90s, one of the things that was very clear to us is the tolling inequity. And so I probably have testimony about that early on, because really it is about the decision making about what gets tolled. and what doesn't get tolled. And so the issue of pathfinding through to the free bridges has been a critical instigator of traffic in and around this area and up through the Gowanus corridor, for example. And so in around 2003, 2004, we got a blueprint study which proved that 50% of the traffic in and through downtown Brooklyn was going through. It was only here to go over the free bridges, which was real hard data to demonstrate that the free bridges were attracting extra traffic through Brooklyn, so that Brooklyn was, a doormat for extra traffic because of those the free bridges. And so, this is something we've been advocating for a long time. I'm very proud that when I was elected to the Assembly, I became a prime co-sponsor of the legislation at that time. It's gone through a couple of iterations, but I'm very proud to have been a sponsor of the congestion pricing bill and to have fought for it in the Assembly. And I was very proud to testify in support of it during the hearing process. So I do encourage everybody to submit your comments. And I did listen to a lot of the comments and the hearings. And one of the things I want the public to know is that all of the arguments that people have made, nobody likes to pay a toll. I am not going to like to pay a toll if I have to pay a toll. Nobody wants to pay a toll. I get it. Some people are better able to pay that toll, and there really is an issue there. Our mass transit system is horribly inaccessible to people with disabilities. So I have in fact fought for a reduction for people with disabilities because they really cannot take public transportation for the most part. But the reality is that all of those arguments are arguments that we debated for years in the legislature. And we came out after balancing all of those arguments with a real crying need to provide extra funding for the infrastructure, for the mass transit, and also the reduction in congestion and in air pollution that would happen if we reduced the car and truck traffic over these bridges. Because if you look at asthma admissions along the corridor, the I-278 corridor, they're way higher than the rest of the borough. And they're almost, but not the same as the Cross Bronx, which suffers greatly from this traffic. So critically important to everybody's health and safety. So it's not just about dollars, it's not just about the MTA can't manage its way out of a paper bag, which people have alleged at various times. It is about climate, it is about our health and safety. That is why I support this, that's why I'm happy to be here today to lend support to this. There are lots and lots of arguments against it, there's lots and more arguments for it, because actually, if we're all dying of asthma and pulmonary disorders, it's not going to make any difference, right? If we don't have a climate, it's not going to make any difference. So this is about climate, this is about our future, it's about our health and safety. And as I said, I'm very, very happy to be here and call attention to it. And I encourage everybody to submit your comments, which are due tomorrow online. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And we've talked a bit about the organizing muscle that has gone into getting congestion pricing over the finish line. One of the groups that has put real sweat equity into this fight is the Riders Alliance. And I want to bring up their executive director, Betsy Plume.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Betsy Plum. I'm executive director of Riders Alliance. We are New York's grassroots membership organization of subway and bus riders. More people in Brooklyn rely on public transit than any place else in the nation. We need subways and buses that are reliable, accessible, that don't flood on mornings like today, that get us where we need to be and get us there on time. The only way we are going to do that is with congestion pricing. With this program, we get the plan to fix the subway. We get the $15 billion that's been mentioned. And Brooklyn riders played a decisive role in winning this program, winning the funding that we deserve for a reliable and accessible system. We will also have faster commutes, shorter emergency response times, and cleaner air. As the borough president said, it's a win-win-win. It's already also the law of the land. Now is just time to implement it.
That's right.
Our borough, our city, and our future depends on it, and it's time to fix the subway. Thank you to Borough President Reynoso, to Councilmember Ressler, to Assemblymember Simon, and everyone who signed on to this letter. We're ready to see this vital program turned on to ensure the way that we're leading a way to a greener, cleaner city and to fixing the subway and having better buses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy, and for everything Riders Alliance does. It is now my pleasure to introduce my friend, the lead of Streets PAC, and Eric McClure has done, and everyone involved in Streets PAC has played a critical role in making sure that every person running for election in Brooklyn and across this city is an ally in the fight for congestion pricing. And I want to thank Eric for all of his work in making that happen. Thank you.
Good morning. As Lincoln said, I'm Eric McClure. I'm the Executive Director of Streets PAC, and I want to thank the Borough President and Councilmember Ressler and Assemblymember Simon for their staunch support for congestion pricing. We are proud to have endorsed all of them for their current offices. And I think it also underscores their presence here and their support for the program. None of them represent districts that are within the tolling zone. We are outside what will be a cordon as you enter Manhattan. And the fact that they recognize the importance of congestion pricing and what it will mean for the transit system, for the $15 billion in capital funding that will be the largest single chunk of money within the MTA capital program, which will help fix signals, speed up subways, build more protected busways, and get people moving where they need to go, building more elevators to make the system more accessible. All of these things are going to be funded by congestion pricing. It also, we should note that in the environmental assessment, all of the scenarios that they studied show that the program delivers upon the goals that were set for it to achieve. It will raise that money for the capital program. It will reduce the number of vehicle crossings into Manhattan. It will reduce traffic within the central business district. That has benefits to business. We lose billions of dollars each year to congestion, and the central business district in Manhattan is where that congestion is worse, even though it sometimes feels like it may be around here or where I live in Park Slope. It's really worse of all in Manhattan. So I want to thank, again, the elected officials here for their support, for all the Brooklyn elected officials who signed that letter, which is deeply meaningful. We're grateful for that, but we urge the Federal Highway Administration to move quickly to approve the environmental assessment so the MTA can start rolling out the program. Thank you.
Eric is so right. Congestion in our city, in the central business district, is worse than ever, and it has significant detrimental impacts on our local economy, on small businesses being able to get the deliveries they need. Congestion pricing is going to make a critical difference to get our city moving. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who is an organizer. He also is our public advocate. He is a true fighter for social justice and environmental justice. It's my pleasure to introduce Jumaane Williams.
Peace and blessing, love and light, everybody. Thank you, Councilman Ressler. Thank you, Borough President, for opening up the hall, and Assembly member and all the advocates who are here. I originally wasn't going to come, then I found out for the timing, and I said I have to be here because it's important as people are raising their voices. And congestion pricing has been something I've been speaking about, I guess, maybe a decade now, even in the council when it was just a bubbling idea. It wasn't particularly popular. It's a little more popular now. It's not everywhere still, but it is incredibly important. And as an elected official, I have found that everybody wants things to change for the better except for where they are. They don't want it to change exactly where they are. They want it to change somewhere else, but affect them for the better. And that's not how this works. And I do have to say that there are some points that are being raised, and those points have to be addressed. We have to mitigate the impact on communities that are suffering right now inequitably. We have to make sure, in my opinion, that the taxi industry is not pushed out completely where people can't afford to feed their family. These are things that we have to address, but there are always things that we have to address when it is time to make change. And change is painful, but it has to be done, and our job is to mitigate the pain as much as possible, particularly in communities that have historically felt the brunt of that type of change. But I want to say, because I hear people speaking about, and it's pretty ironic to me, because we cannot try to hold Joe Manchin accountable for not wanting to make the change needed in the coal industry, and then say we are opposed to congestion pricing because it's painful. Because I gotta tell you, there are jobs that will be lost in Joe Manchin's district. And we do have to find a way to mitigate that job loss. But he is wrong for trying to prevent the changes needed in the coal industry. And all of us here know that, including the people who are opposing congestion pricing. They are probably the loudest voices in what's being done wrong over there. Well, here is our turn. It is our turn to say we have to do what's right, even though there's some pain associated with it. And it's really important that we're consistent in that message. We don't look somewhere else where it's easier to point something out. We say, look, we have to do it here as well. Congestion pricing is the right thing to do. And yes, it will have some painful aspects to it. And yes, it will be some change, but we have to move forward as quickly as humanly possible for our climate, for our health, and from additional funding to get to our mass transit systems. And we can do that while mitigating the pain. So I'm imploring the federal agencies to move forward as quickly as possible. And I'm imploring folks to mitigate the impact that has been raised on this plan at the same time. Peace and blessings, love and light to everyone. Thank you.
Bring that mic back down. That was beautiful. Thank you, Jumaane. And it's now my pleasure to introduce someone, although she's left our neighborhood, we still love her, and she's doing tremendous work at the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, the Director of Climate and Equity Policy, Jackie Cohen.
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler. Thank you, Assemblymember and Borough President. My name is Jackie Cohen. I'm the Director of Climate and Equity Policy at Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Look, we all agree that our public transit system here in New York is our lifeblood. It is some of the most important public infrastructure in the country as a whole. But let me give you a little bit of background as to how well the lifeblood of our city is functioning right now. We have a subway system that still heavily operates using 1930s signaling technology, which is why subways are so often late. We have the slowest buses in America. We have subway stations that are mostly inaccessible. I think only a quarter or less of stations have an elevator, and that's when the elevators are working. That's when they're accessible. So we need this money. This is why we fought so hard for congestion pricing in the first place. We need the $15 billion to reform, to revitalize our transit system. And as you heard, it's not just about what's happening on our transit system, but it's about our air quality, our climate, it's about traffic violence, which has been ever on the rise, especially in the Central Business District of New York. We need congestion pricing because all New Yorkers stand to benefit. The majority of residents of New York City take public transit. The vast majority of those commuting into the Central Business District of Manhattan do so on transit. We need this funding. We need to fix our subway and our buses. And so we thank Councilmember Ressler for putting together this letter. And we need to, now we're counting on the federal government to let us implement congestion pricing once and for all. This is the right thing to do. Thank you.
That was perfectly said. Thank you, Jackie. I would now like to introduce Megan Ahern from NYPIRG's Strap Hangers campaign, folks who have been really leading the fight on behalf of our subway and bus riders for many, many decades. Thank you for everything the Strap Hangers campaign does, and Megan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. As the council member said, I'm Megan Ahern. I'm the program director of NYPIRG, and our Strap Hangers campaign is a voice of subway and bus riders here in the city. And as a student-directed organization, we hear from students every day, loud and clear, that they want better public transportation. Far too often, public transit is unreliable, and students are forced to choose between expensive alternatives like rideshare apps and cabs, or completely miss their plans and responsibilities. And vintage might be a sustainable way to buy a kitchen table at a secondhand store. But as Jackie said, some of the subway infrastructure has been around since the 30s, and vintage is not the way to run a subway system. I want to also follow up on something the public advocate said, which is that there will be pain, but bus riders and subway riders have been feeling that pain with unreliable subway service that can be derailed or late, or you get to the subway station and the next train is in 25 minutes, and buses that are slowest in the nation. So congestion pricing will give us the funding that the subways and buses and riders need to get to school, to get to jobs, to get to civic centers and participate in society. And it's the right thing to do, like so many other speakers have said. So let's get it done now. I want to also thank Assembly Member, Council Member, and Borough President for leading this letter that's going to be sent in today. And also echo the sentiments that everyone should get their comments in by tomorrow's deadline in support of congestion pricing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I would now like to introduce our last speaker, Tiffany Ann Taylor from the Regional Planning Association. And the RPA has provided some of the most important brainpower behind this proposal. And we really want to thank them for their leadership and hard work. Thank you, Tiffany Ann. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to our local officials for hosting this rally this morning. As Councilmember Ressler mentioned, my name is Tiffany Ann Taylor. I'm the Vice President for Transportation at the Regional Planning Association, also known as RPA. It is a 100-year-old civic organization that's focused on urban planning and quality of life improvements for the tri-state area. It is without a doubt that we need to make sure that congestion pricing is implemented today. There is no time to wait. Climate change is happening. It's very real. We all witnessed the flooding and the intensity of the storms even this morning. Congestion pricing is just one piece of that puzzle to be able to move forward. We also need dedicated funding for MTA's capital plan. I will echo everyone's sentiments that came before mine. Improvements to our transit system, to subways, to buses, also making sure that there is priority for pedestrian access, accessibility throughout stations, throughout the 5 boroughs. It's really important. Everyone benefits from congestion pricing. If there is a reduction in harmful emissions due to air quality, that's a benefit. Improvements in public transportation, that's a benefit. If you do choose to drive, there should be less congestion. In theory, that is also a benefit. We need to make sure that we are really considering, as a region, how we are addressing climate change, how we are continuing to invest in public infrastructure, specifically the MTA's capital program moving forward, and of course, make sure that this does not come at the cost of any neighborhood. Any opportunity to implement helpful mitigations, making sure we're upgrading so that there's no harmful effects to our neighbors in the South Bronx or anywhere else in the city or the region is absolutely important. So I will reiterate, congestion pricing is important. It is a piece of a major puzzle, and we need it today. Thank you very much.
We're going to have one more speaker. I just want to make a few quick thank yous before our final speaker. I want to thank many of the groups who are with us today, Jackson from Open Plans, Justin from NILPI. I'd like to also just thank our staffs because, we're the ones who stand up here, but Neve and Molly and Mariana from our office, and Stephanie and Isabel and Lacey and John, and even Asher, who I guess was on vacation for most of this, but, we love him anyway, from Antonio's team. We thank you all for helping to make today happen. We really appreciate it. And our final speaker is Aaliyah Sumro, whose name I apologize if I'm butchering, from the great New York League of Conservation Voters. Thank you. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, I apologize.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaliyah Sumro. I'm the Deputy Director for New York City Policy at the New York League of Conservation Voters, a statewide environmental advocacy organization. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso, Councilmember Ressler, and Assemblymember Simon, and all New Yorkers who are standing here today to rally for congestion pricing. We are longstanding supporters of congestion pricing because, one, it would improve air quality and public health by disincentivizing unnecessary car and truck trips into Manhattan. Two, raise $15 billion to improve the speed and reliability of the MTA's mass transit system. And three, meaningfully decrease greenhouse gas emissions to help the city combat the impacts of climate change. We urge USDOT to swiftly approve this program when the public comment period ends tomorrow, and for the MTA, New York State, and city governments to implement this program as soon as possible. Additionally, we are concerned that under some scenarios, the environmental assessment forecasts potential increases in pollutants in places such as the Bronx and Staten Island. Because of this, we urge the Traffic Mobility Review Board to choose a tolling scenario that creates the lowest possible amount of traffic diversion and for the state and city to comprehensively mitigate environmental injustices. We are in solidarity with other environmental justice organizations calling for mitigation measures such as capping the Cross Bronx Expressway. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alia. Happy to take a couple questions, or we can do interviews after for anyone who would like. Go ahead. Hey, Kevin, how are you? I think that we should make exemptions as narrow as possible. And I think that we should have some reduced fare structure for taxis and FHVs. But the goal here is to limit the number of cars and trucks that are on the road. And so I strongly support the most limited forms of exemptions that we can build consensus around and keep it moving.
Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to that earlier, and that is that I think there are some people who are people, for example, people with disabilities, really precluded in many cases from taking public transportation. And of course, you know, we also need to provide better public transportation to those transit deserts that we have in our borough and in other boroughs as well. But this will help provide the money to do that. So I agree it should be as narrow an exemption as possible. There are people who have argued for none at all. I think that's inequitable. But I also think that we can't just have too many exemptions. You have too many exemptions, you're not going to raise the money, and you're not going to reduce congestion. So we have to really cut this back as much as we possibly can. Well, listen, my testimony has been about that. I do understand there's an issue with taxis, for example, who already pay a congestion fee, right? So they're paying a congestion fee. It makes some sense to look carefully at that. But, you know, there are people who literally cannot take this train. They cannot take the buses. The buses are accessible, but they don't go where they need to go. They don't go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, for example. There's like one bus over the Williamsburg Bridge and one express bus. People still complain about the bus that got canceled probably 25 years ago that went over the Manhattan Bridge. So, well, it's about that. It's a long time ago.
It's been a while. It's been a minute.
Listen, every time flies, you know, right? So it was a long time ago, because it was before I was involved in you know.
Get the complaints too.
Yeah, you can still get, that's what I'm saying, we get the complaints. So people miss that, right? So people miss certain bus routes, for example, that are helpful, and that would also reduce the amount of driving. You know, people complain about a lot of different bus routes that are no longer there, and the MTA said they didn't have enough ridership, but they were also so lousy that people weren't taking them as much, and they really need to improve that service. So all of this means that we have to balance all of these things, and congestion pricing really gives us a tool to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Well, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and let's get this done. Have a good afternoon, everyone.